Welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio World. This is our special coverage of the coronavirus and its impacts on South Seattle and surrounding communities. It's me, your host, Tony B. I'm here every Friday and have been since March 13th when this all got started. At the time, really did not believe we would still be here today on Fridays talking about issues regarding the coronavirus. You know, as we know, mistakes have been made all along the way on both sides of the political spectrum in regards to the impact of the coronavirus. But what we've tried to do is make sure that we give you reliable information that impacts our community so you can make the best decisions about what you need to do to make sure that you are safe and healthy and aware. This week, no different. Joining us on the program, we're going to talk to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I believe I have Steve on the line with me. Steve Burns. Steve, are you there?
Hi, Tony. Can you hear me?
I can, Steve. And Jim Griffin is supposed to be joining us. Is Jim going to be joining us?
He's actually here with me right now. So when we start the video, you will see Jim.
All right. And so we're going to be talking to the FBI. We want to find out how, of course, the pandemic has impacted the FBI in Seattle. And that's important because the worst civil unrest in decades erupted in cities across the United States as anger was sparked by the death of a black man in Minneapolis in police custody who was killed, George Floyd. Demonstrations nationwide took place. In some instances, protesters torched vehicles, smashed windows, and defaced buildings. Protests rippled across these cities and outrage erupted. President Trump called for a tougher government response as some protests that began peacefully later included clashes, looting, and destruction. Well, where does the FBI fit into all of this? Who is the FBI? What is the FBI? We're going to get answers to some of these questions and more. And here's the deal. If you would like to participate in this conversation, you can give me a call at 206-290-9685. That's 206-280-9685. 206-290-U5, YOU5, and we'll see if we can get you on the air and let you ask a question and get that question answered as well. That's how we get down on Rainier Avenue Radio. Our goal is to make sure that we amplify the diverse voices of our community. You know what? We'll just get started. I'd like to welcome to the program Supervisory Special Agent, Mr. Jim Griffin. Jim, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing all right, Tony. I'm very excited to be with you today.
And thank you for joining us. Why don't we start with this? Everyone can go to the website and find out information about the FBI, who you are, what you do, and again, your responsibilities. But why don't we hear it from you? Maybe seem like a very basic question. Who is or what is the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Yes, a good question. Are we on video as well, or
we are on video as well? Yes.
Okay. Can you see him?
I can't see him.
Can you see Jim?
Daniel,
Tony, can you see Jim?
No.
Oh, there we go.
Others? All right, let's see. Start video. Can you see me now?
Yes.
All right, sorry about that.
Don't worry, Jim. Since we've begun broadcasting through this virtual reality that we live in right now, often people have these problems.
That is so true. So that is so true. So again, thanks for having me here. I think there is a lot of questions out there. There are a lot of questions out there about what the FBI's role is and who we are and what we do. But I think to not to try and oversimplify it, but our main mission is to protect the people of the United States, and whether that's from terrorism or fraud or violent crime. That's really what our mission is to protect the people in our communities.
Okay, and when you say protect the people in your communities as a federal organization, do you work exclusively with Seattle? Do you become engaged in activities that are of a federal nature, or do you become engaged in activities that are exclusively a local nature? And where are those boundaries?
Right, that's a very good question. So just to give you an idea of how investigations work. We do not participate. Now, we work closely with all of our partners, our state, our local, our other federal partner agencies on investigations. We share information, but as far as investigations of the FBI, there needs to be some sort of federal nexus, something transcending state lines, some sort of violation of federal law before we open up an investigation. So to answer your question, do we conduct investigations on something that is solely a state or local matter? The answer is no. But do we work closely with all of our partners? Yes, we do. We work very closely, especially here in Seattle, with Seattle PD. We work closely with our other federal and state partners as well.
And just a little background information on yourself, if you wouldn't mind sharing, a little information on yourself and what interested you in becoming an officer for the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Well, it's kind of funny. So I grew up in North Carolina. Lived there my entire life. Went to college in North Carolina, and at some point, I don't really recall, how I ended up there. I'd always had some interest in investigations, and being a detective. Always wanted to work closely with the community, and be a positive role model. And then I ended up actually becoming a police officer and a detective for a police department in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina. And probably about 5.5 years in, someone spoke with me and recommended that I apply to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I did, and that's as they say, was that. I've been here with the FBI since 2006.
Okay. And Jim, I know that that we're going to have some difficult conversations here over the course of the next hour. This isn't a gotcha thing that we do on Rainier Avenue Radio, but we do have open, honest, and frank conversation. And I think for a lot of folks, they weren't even aware that there was an FBI in Seattle until recently, or what role the federal government would play. So I'm going to start here. Anger in Seattle over what I talked about when I introduced the program about the George Floyd murder in Minnesota spilled over here May 30th. A peaceful demonstration was overcome by violence, looting, arson. In the words of Raymond Duda, special agent in charge with the Seattle FBI office, we immediately stood up a command post to work very closely with the Seattle Police Department and our Joint Terrorism Task Force to see if we could identify those individuals who were bent on violence, on hijacking the peaceful protest to commit acts of violence that would be potential violations of federal criminal law. Let's start with that. If there is no violation of federal criminal law, do you not have a role to play? Are you just observers?
No, so that's I wouldn't say that is accurate, that we don't have a role to play. A large portion, I think a lot of people see the FBI as a law enforcement agency, as a law enforcement organization, but we do have a domestic intelligence role, right? And I think that's one of the things that people do overlook. So if there are threats of violence, if there's information or intelligence out there that indicates that that protesters are in danger or being threatened, that law enforcement, federal buildings, local and state government buildings, anything that where there's a threat to life, we are gonna, if we have that intelligence, we are gonna share it with our partners, and that's gonna be our local partners. It's gonna be Seattle PD. It might be a sheriff's office, and it might be other federal partner agencies. But as a domestic intelligence agency, as well as a law enforcement agency, we are gonna play a role in that and share that information.
Okay, what does that mean? We immediately stood up a command post. For those of us who are not in law enforcement, what does that mean? Can you walk us through the process of what happened again May 30th as things were unfolding in Seattle, and the FBI's role and the chain of command, and how that worked to where you say we stood up a command post, and who you decided you were going to work with and what that looked like for everybody who doesn't know how that works?
Right. So first of all, as far as deciding who we're going to work with, those relationships are already in place, right? So especially, and just for everybody's awareness, when we say the FBI in Seattle, that's the actual Seattle division, Seattle field office, but that encompasses, the entire state of Washington. So we do have what we would call resident agencies, or little sub offices throughout the state. And throughout the state, we do have relationships, whether, it's, a Safe Streets Task Force for violent crime, if it's a Violent Crimes Against Children Task Force to address crimes against children, or human trafficking, or if it's the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We do have relationships with our state and local partners already in place. We do meet with them. So that is already decided beforehand, because when a critical incident or something of this magnitude happens, where you're receiving information that there's significant violent activity that's occurring, or there are threats to potentially, and again, across the nation as this unfolded, threats to protesters, threats to federal buildings, threats to local buildings. You don't want the first time that you're engaging folks is to be when that happens. So we already have those in place. As far as standing up a command post, really the way that I could boil that down is we're going to take a surge in resources, right? Like we're going to take a look at our resources in Washington State, like our FBI agents, all of our FBI personnel, intelligence analysts, task force officers, and we're going to surge those resources to address, the threat of violence in violation of federal law, right? So that's what standing up a command post is: taking a look at what resources in the division we need in place at any one time, what we need to do to get information out for the people that need to have it, especially if there's threats of violence, threats against police officers, threats against citizens, threats against the community. And we aren't looking from one side or the other. It's our focus is violent criminal activity, against the people of the United States. So we need to know what resources we need to have, here in the building to carry out the mission of the FBI. So that's really what standing up a command post would be.
Okay, and what did that look like? And I'll start with, did you have information, or once you were aware that there was going to be a peaceful protest, do you immediately put boots on the ground? Do you walk with the protest? How does that work? How do you begin the process of identifying individuals again, as you say, bent on violence, hijacking peaceful protests, committing acts of violence. How does that work?
Right. So no, we do not. To answer your question, no, we do not immediately put boots on the ground when there's going to be. We identify that there's going to be a peaceful protest, right? And actually, I think the day that a lot of the protests started, I was actually here in the office, and earlier in the afternoon, the protests were peaceful. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and there wasn't anything that we were really concerned with or looking at that, and actually feel like protesters marched past the building behind us on Fourth Avenue here. So no, we're not looking at peaceful protests. That's not what concerns us. It's what concerns us is when protests turn violent, right? And just because they turn violent and there's damage to property, that doesn't mean that it's automatically a federal matter, right? But when it does become civil unrest, when it does include threats of violence, and we try not to look at ideology, right? I think a lot of people or a lot of folks out there, talk about, well, the right and the left, but our real focus is there a potential violation of federal law? And if so, what is the purpose of that violation? Are we trying to threaten force or violence to affect a population, a civilian population, or government? And so that's what our focus is. And once we start to see things like that happening, that's when we'll start to figure out, hey, we need to start working with our partners, our law enforcement partners, working with prosecutors, and really looking at, hey, is this something that solely falls into a local jurisdictional matter, or hey, is this something that the federal government needs to be involved in, specifically the FBI?
My guest again is Jim Griffin, Supervisory Special Agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Is it correct to say the Seattle office, or is it the Washington State office, or
the Seattle office? Correct. Yeah.
Seattle office, but you work statewide.
Yes, that's it, sir.
Okay. So I'm having a little problem here. So you're sitting in the office, protests are taking place. The FBI is the entity that looks into terrorism, counterterrorism, a number of different things. At some point, either it feels like you're negligent if you don't put boots on the ground, because how are you going to gather information? At what point did someone say, or did you say, or does it come from the DC? Somebody get out there and figure out what's going on. There could be more to this. There are protests happening all over the country. At what point, or during that May 30th, did you begin to activate, and what was that activation? Or did nothing happen as far as the Federal Bureau of until windows began being smashed, and then somebody came out of the office, hey, we need to do something?
Now, so one of the things I want to make clear is, we're not a police force, right? Mm-hmm. So even if there are things going on out on the street, there's things being smashed. Again, if it's not a violation of federal law, then we don't have authority to investigate that, and we're not gonna put agents on the ground to go and restrict people's movement. That's not what we do. But we do have sources and methods. We do take a look at what the landscape is. You are absolutely correct. At some point, it reaches it reaches a point where we need to find out additional information on it once the violence does start, right? Because like I said, You know, if it's peaceful protest, we don't focus on groups. I want to say that right now. We don't focus on groups. We focus on and investigate individuals who are, you know, really conducting violent acts or carrying out violent acts in violation of federal law. So I want to say that first and foremost. But yes, you know, at some point we decide, hey, we need to set up some sort of command post, surge resources. And part of surging resources is making certain that, hey, maybe we need to have some of our people from the FBI sitting with local law enforcement to make certain that we're sharing information appropriately and, you know, sharing intelligence appropriately so we can make a decision on what we need to do. But, you know, we are not, sometimes that can come from Washington, D.C. saying like, hey, we want a command post stood up, but each individual office, you know, depending on what's going on the ground, they may stand up a command post sooner than that. So it's, yeah, what it looked like for us that day was, yeah, it's once, you know, once the violent activity started, and we had reports of violent activity and damage to property, you know, police vehicles, municipal vehicles, buses being torched. Yeah, that's when we realized, okay, we probably need to, you know, surge resources, have a command post, and have people inside the building and working with our local partners to identify those people committing those violent acts.
So at some point you had somebody had to leave the office and go down to where the protest was taking place, and that happened on May 30th. Is that correct?
No, sir, not leave the office, bring people into the office,
Bring
right?
people
So,
into
I
the
mean,
office.
it's a, you know, so it's a, and I believe that was a weekend,
Mhm.
right? So it's bringing people into the office. It's like, because again, we're not a police force. So typically, we don't have agents, you know, working over the weekend, right? You know, we had to bring agents or other personnel as a whole working over the weekend. So we had to bring people into the office to be in a position to address threats and intelligence that arose and be able to push that out and act on it.
Okay, how would you address? How would you figure out what a threat was during this time if no one was there? Doesn't that seem like at that point you're not doing your job? If part of what you are supposed to do is ensure the safety of federal buildings, if you're supposed to recognize terrorist threats, at this point in time, things are happening all over the country. Who knows where these threats are coming from? Who knows who's part of these protests that eventually turned violent? And you don't put someone there. The FBI doesn't have anyone there to begin the process of determining who might be a violent protester, an instigator, or an inciter?
No, we do, and look, I'm going to be transparent, and I'm going to answer the questions that I can, and there are going to be some questions that I can't answer, and you know, we do have sources and methods that we do try and protect, but no, we do have the mechanisms in place aside from actually just being on the ground or being out amongst protesters to collect that intelligence and identify people committing those violent acts. And that also involves working with our local law enforcement partners and our other federal partner agencies that, you know, may be responsible for protecting federal buildings, or local police throughout the state that may be on the ground and actually seeing these violent offenders and getting that information from them. So there are people on the ground that we can get that information from and make a determination as to whether that's a federal violation, and do we need to conduct investigative activity to further identify those people, and if appropriate, work toward federal charges.
And who are those people on the ground? Are they other federal agencies? Are they police officers? Are they, I don't know, just citizens who you've identified as people you can get information from? And again, you know, I have to ask you these questions, and these are things that people are curious about as we have this conversation. Where do these sources and what makes you feel that they're reliable, and what can you say to us that makes us as citizens feel like, okay, if the FBI is not there and they're relying on sources that we don't get to know, but this information is going up to the highest levels, I mean, you got to be able to tell us something about that. Who are they?
And so when I say sources and methods, that just doesn't mean probably what, you know, the listener is thinking, like there's someone in the community that is providing information. You know, it also means investigative techniques, reviewing, you know, any other material that we can come across that is actually not, you know, from, you know, human based, right? So there's a lot of methods and that we do use. Again, don't want to reveal those, you know, trying to answer your question as best as possible, but no, it's not, we are not putting people on the ground to focus on protesters, right? We are supportive of everyone's First Amendment rights to assemble, to protest, to speech. And so unless there is something there that like, again, once violence starts, like anything before that, I was here in the office, people protesting peacefully. We didn't have people in the office. As once the violence starts, damage to property, you know, torching of municipal vehicles is where we start to look at it, because there's a potential violation of federal law, right?
My guest again is Jim Griffin, Supervisory Special Agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Seattle office. Jim, thanks for joining us. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to take a quick break here. When I come back, we'll talk about some more specifics. And obviously, I'm going to talk about the CHAZ and the CHOP as well. We'll be back in about 3 minutes right after this. Rainier Avenue Radio. Rainier Avenue Radio presents All Music, All Day Saturday. Music, all day Saturday.
This is Edwin Bailey, Bulldog Blues.
Jazz from the Cabinets.
That's right. It's time once again for Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy.
Star Time.
Thanks for tuning in. My name is Paul Pierce. This is Star Time.
Saturdays, all music, all day. Reggae Hour, K-Fox Night.
Looking for the perfect beat? Yeah, it's the beat of the Fox.
Fresh Juice, D-Money in the crew.
Myself, D-Money. Nice Eyes Patron.
Taylor Hart.
This is Spencia, the Northwest Rap Game.
DJ Medina, Chad Cheddar, Northwest Rap Game.
Sergio LaCour's Love Line.
It's Sergio's Love Lines with Sergio LaCour. Going to the phone lines. Hello, who we talking?
Sea Monster Radio. Mo Jams. It's your jam.
We're live. Welcome to Mo Jam Mondays. This is KZ of KZ Music Media. Caller Goddess for Mo Jam Mondays.
Just my opinion. God is inspiration. Music. All day and all night. Saturdays on RainierAvenueRadio.org.
This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio. Mayor Bill de Blasio condemned an NYPD raid on the home of Black Lives Matter activist Derek Ingram. Per Politico, last Friday, the NYPD attempted to arrest Ingram, which sparked an hours-long standoff that involved police helicopters, dogs, and the closure of the activist's Manhattan street. The attempted arrest followed another controversial arrest of a young transgender woman during a protest who was dragged into an unmarked van. Ingram, who was wanted on assault charges for allegedly placing a megaphone directly against a police officer's ear and yelling during a past demonstration, later turned himself in. On the matter, de Blasio said, quote, anything that constitutes an assault on an officer, there will be consequences. That's a very different matter than how you go about it. And when you go about it effectuating the arrest, that's something that's going to be handled very differently going forward, unquote. The mayor said the raid was authorized by lower level supervisors and did not indicate anyone who would face discipline. He said the department would change its rules so that higher level approvals would be needed for such actions. And that's your news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
You can protect others from getting sick from COVID-19. Here's what you do. Stay at home unless you need food, medicine, or medical care. Avoid large crowds. And if you have to go out, stay at least 6 feet away from other people. Don't forget to wear a cloth face covering so you don't spread germs when you talk, sneeze, or cough. Cloth coverings should not, however, be used on children under 2. For more information, call 206-477-3977. That's 206-477-3977.
You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Check us out on social media. Facebook and Instagram, Rainier Avenue Radio.world, and on Twitter at Rainier Ave Radio.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. It's me, your host, Tony B. We are having a discussion today with Jim Griffin, Supervisory Special Agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Seattle Department. Again, they work statewide. And we were essentially talking about that engagement and what that looks like, where it starts, and specifically referring back to May 30th when all of this got started. We've been having marches, protests. Some of them have been violent. Some of them have contained looting as well. And at that point, I guess, is when the FBI steps in if there's a potential threat to maybe the police force or to federal buildings. And my guest, Mr. Griffin, says you do not consider ideology something that you would investigate. But again, as these protests began to unfold around the country and in Seattle, I know that there are anarchist groups who are in the Pacific Northwest who would see this as an opportunity. I'm sure y'all have to know that. And again, as this unfolds, how do you start the process of determining who is a terrorist threat during these Seattle protests? And what was that action taken? And if you don't regard ideology as something that you're going to investigate, what's the point of saying, oh, this is an anarchist, these are the Proud Boys, this is a member of Antifa? Aren't those ideologies?
Right. So a couple of things. First and foremost, let me say, I do appreciate the questions that you're asking. I think these are questions that the community definitely want answers to, given everything that's been going on the past several months. And the other thing I wanted to hit on, I know you did mention, and I said it, yes, federal buildings, police force, violent activity, but that includes violent activity to protesters, right? To people that are lawfully out there protesting, they're, threats that.
But people are saying that the police are doing that to people, not that these other folks are. They're saying the violence is coming from the police. And so my question is, how are you determining, again, if you don't question ideology, if that's not, and the thing is, if I know there are anarchists and I know that there are Proud Boys, how can you not take that into consideration when something like this is happening?
Right. So, I mean, yes, everyone's aware of ideology, right? But ideology in and of itself is not a crime, right? Ideology, if I consider myself an anarchist, but that's my ideology, but I'm not convicting or committing any acts of violence, I'm not committing any crime, any violation of federal crime, then legally we can't investigate those people, right? And it doesn't matter if it's an anarchist or Proud Boy or a white supremacist or whomever it is. Ideology in and of itself is a First Amendment protected right. We have things in place to ensure that.
I'm going to interrupt you here for a second because again, when you go back to the 1960s, with the Ku Klux Klan and the way the FBI was changing at that time, and then the FBI was investigating the Black Panthers and investigating those were ideological things, and they were being investigated. I don't think that's changed. What would be the purpose of gathering information and identifying groups like this if in the interest of public safety, in the interest of federal buildings, and you know that there's something going on like a march, and you know that these groups are going to show up, and then to say, well, that I'm not buying that, and I don't think that the public is buying that, and I'm not calling you saying that you're not telling the truth. I just think that we need a better answer than that.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is, no, like that in and of itself isn't cause to investigate an individual. And again, we do not investigate groups. Like as the FBI, we do not investigate groups. We investigate individuals committing violent activity, inciting violence in violation of federal law, right? So again, going back to what I was saying before the break, yes, we do have things in place. We do have we do communicate with our local partners. We do try and identify and gather intelligence on someone who may be responsible for inciting that violence or committing those criminal acts. But just having an ideology in and of itself is not a cause for investigation.
Okay. How do you determine if someone is a violent protester or an instigator or an inciter? What would someone be doing for you to determine we need to pay attention to this individual?
I think one of the things we'd probably look at, and just using some of the activity that happened at the end of May, is, hey, who are the people? Obviously, who are the people committing the crime? So when you look on TV or you look out and you see the news and you see people actually in the process of torching a municipal vehicle, then that's obviously someone that we're going to look at, and we're going to try and identify. We're going to try and find out who those people are, and do some additional digging and figure out what else is there. Just basic course of investigation that we do for the FBI. But those types of instances, those individuals where you see them, like we're going to try and identify that, and we're going to go from there.
And for the people who live in our communities, I know you got to understand this. There is a difference between someone who has pent up frustration, who's been a victim of systemic oppression, who again, I don't want to just call it letting off steam, but it is committing, some form of looting or something like that. There's a difference between someone who goes there with the plan and intention to begin the process of instigating violence, of being a provocateur. And how can you not, as the FBI, say that you paying attention to who those individuals are? Or how would you separate, or you would put on the same level someone who's not done this before, someone who's, again, down there and mad about a lot of things, mad about George Floyd? They get put on the same level as someone from an entity that is committed to violence and perpetrating crimes against the government?
Right. So when you say entity,
I mean like anarchists, like the Proud Boys, like the Ku Klux Klan, like somebody who has an agenda that you're saying because of the ideology. So you put that person, that young black man who happened to do something, on the same level as someone who's an anarchist or someone from the Proud Boys. You don't separate that. You don't say that ideology makes a difference as opposed to someone who's acting spur of the moment, who's that, regardless of the act. I'm not excusing the act, but someone who's caught up in the moment. You don't separate that when you're identifying or determining who a violent protester is or who an instigator is.
As the FBI, as an investigator, when I'm looking at people and I'm looking at the violation of federal law, yes. Do I understand the as you say, the pent up frustration in the community? Yes. Being a law enforcement officer for 20 years, am I immune to any of the experiences that a lot of us have experienced? No. So I do understand your question. But as investigators, we're not afforded the luxury of understanding, each individual, like their reasons behind committing certain acts. And what we have to do is we have to look at, what people are doing. And yes, there are people out there that are, as Mr. Duda, as the SAC of the Seattle field office said, who are hijacking the peaceful protests, who are hijacking the message.
Well, how do you determine
is there
that?
a way that like we can say like, okay, this person is doing it because they're an opportunist, or they're doing it because they have some other agenda? I think that's a little difficult for us to do without actually knowing the individual.
Well, once you've identified someone as a violent protester instigator, what do you do with that information at that point? Is there an investigation on this individual, their background, and what's the point of that? What do you do with that information? I guess we'll start with that. How do you identify someone? And at that point, once you've identified someone, what do you do with that information? Right.
So if we've opened an investigation of someone, there's been some sort of violation of criminal law or the possibility that it violated criminal law. So we do open an investigation. We aren't open an investigation because—
And that would be on an individual.
On an individual, not a group.
Okay,
right?
and that would be someone at the protest who you saw who's committed, a violent protester, an instigator or inciter, and at that point you would open an investigation on that individual, and what you do with that information is what?
We open the investigation on an individual again. Federal, there has to be a federal nexus, right? Like we're not gonna, hey, if it's just, if there's not a civil unrest, or if it's just, hey, someone broke a window, that's not the FBI. We don't have the resources, to focus on solely on that type of activity. What we're looking at are individuals that are, again, committing violent acts, inciting violence. So when you say violent protester, what I would like to do is take it one step further. Is someone that we have seen that has actually gone out to try and really just create a lot of havoc, right? And it pulls away. Our goal is to protect people's rights to protest, and to not have that message and those rights hijacked by people who want to conduct like massive amounts of violence and damage to property. And so if we see people doing that, and we've identified those individuals, or we're trying to identify those individuals, we may not have an actual ID, but we're going to work toward identifying who those individuals are. And there's a myriad of investigative techniques that we're going to employ that, obviously, I'm not going to be able to get into on the show. But yes, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take that, we're going to do the investigation, and we're going to try and identify those individuals. And then from there, try and identify, if we can, their motivation behind what they're doing.
My guest again is Jim Griffin, Supervisory Special Agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Seattle Department. Jim, again, thank you for being here. I understand where you're at, but I got to try to get you to answer these questions. I do want to get to the CHOP and CHAZ and go back on some of the things that we've talked about. There's this thing that I'm getting called subversive influence. When I say subversive influence, how would you explain that as an FBI agent to the public? Subversive influence.
When you say subversive influence, I'm not. What exactly are you trying to? What exactly are you asking, sir? Is, I guess, the question.
I'm saying that individuals who are influencing other folks to commit violent acts or inciting behavior that could include looting, that's subversive. That happens. That's subversive. That's what I'm calling subversive influence.
Okay.
If you see it as something different, you tell me what that is, and how do you respond to a group of folks exerting subversive influence. If you're only looking at individuals, that just make that make sense for me.
All right, we can't focus, like, just because, let's say I'm an anarchist, or I consider myself an anarchist. It's not a group, you know. It's not a, hey, I've got a membership here, I'm officially an anarchist. And it's not like, you know, after 9/11, you know, a lot of focus on international terrorism. Hey, there's designated foreign terrorist organizations where if you're a member of ISIS, all right, we're going to look at you and you're a member of ISIS and you're a member of a group that's been designated that we know is a threat to the United States. Just because I say that I'm Antifa, or, you know, I like to fly the Confederate flag, doesn't mean that I am going out and participating in subversive influence. I'm not going out and I'm trying to encourage people to go out and commit acts of violence, right? So I think that's the difference between what people call domestic terrorism and international terrorism. Like, I can't lump everybody that says that they're an anarchist or a particular part of a group, or subscribe to a particular ideology, and say, hey, this person in this group that says that they subscribe to these ideologies and these beliefs, they've committed a crime. And so that's why we can't look at those a group of people that subscribe to the same or similar ideologic beliefs and investigate all of them. We can't do that. It has to be based on, you know, specific individuals, you know, inciting that violence, encouraging people to go out and commit that violence. We can't look at people as a group, because that is a violation of their First Amendment protected rights. So we have to focus on individuals and individual acts of criminal activity.
So is this a true statement that the Seattle FBI is watching closely for violent and destructive agitators in the crowds of protesters? Is that an accurate statement?
That's a good question. An accurate statement is the FBI is and always will be especially in times of civil unrest, we're going to be looking for individuals that are committing violent activity. You know, not out amongst, you know, the way it's phrased, like, oh, the FBI is out amongst the protesters looking for people committing violent acts. No, that's not it. We're not focused on protesters, right? We're focused on criminal activity.
That's what I asked. I said, the FBI is watching closely for violent and destructive agitators in the crowds at these protests. I mean, if you're not there, how are you going to do that? So are you there looking for violent and destructive agitators? So yeah, I don't know. That's not accurate.
Right. And so, like, yeah, like, again, I appreciate your question and the way that it's worded, with watching and being present in the crowds. Yeah, the connotation is geared a certain way, and again, I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna answer that question the way it's phrased. What I will tell you that is accurate is, yes, we are looking for people that are committing violent acts and inciting violence. I'm not going to say, oh, this is, you know, this is what we're doing, right? Like, oh yeah, we're out in the crowds. We are not focused on protest. We do not look at protest. We look at violent activity. That's what we look for. And we're not a police organization. So we are, in general, are not on the ground amongst protesters looking for that. But we do have sources and methods that allow us, and sharing of information with other law enforcement partners that allow us to put us in a really good position to have visibility on that.
And I'm going to move on to this, but the last question is, are there currently protesters who are under investigation in Seattle?
Sir, we're at the FBI. We don't confirm, deny investigations. As part of being the FBI, that's just we don't do that, right?
Okay, can't answer that particular question. Let's go to the CHAZ or the CHOP. And again, my guest is Jim Griffin, the Supervisory Special Agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're having a conversation about the role the FBI plays in Seattle, in particular during the civil unrest that's taken place. A couple of things. There was, and again, I'm hearing this information, some concern about influence from foreign entities, the Chinese, the Russians. I even heard Zimbabwe and Iran. Is this something that you're investigating regarding the whatever you want to call it, the CHAZ, the CHOP, and was this at all a concern of yours?
Right. So, in general, again, we don't, as the FBI, we don't confirm or deny investigations. You know, some of the things that you touch on, again, would probably be national security matters, which obviously I wouldn't discuss with you. But we don't confirm or deny investigations. But again, what I can say in general is we take any sort of influence, you know, domestically, you know, whether it's foreign, you know, whether it's from, you know, individuals based in the U.S. That are going to incite violence and violent activity. We look at all of that and we take it very seriously.
The FBI was providing intelligence to the Seattle Police Department. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We routinely share information, and Seattle PD, we have a good relationship with them. And yes, we share information.
And you had intelligence on possible explosive devices, firearms, and this is all happening in the CHAZ and the CHOP, extensive distribution of illegal narcotics, and this is information that you provided to the Seattle Police Department?
Yes, that is correct.
And how, if you can tell us, where was this information gathered from? Was it gathered from individuals? If it wasn't gathered from groups? If it had nothing to do with ideology? How did you access the intelligence where these explosive devices were coming? They were just coming from individual people, coming from their homes. They weren't coming from organized groups. And that seems like it would make a big difference, in particular if you're talking about foreign entities or, again, folks who are ideological in their belief.
Yeah, that's again, going back to sources and methods and protecting those. And I know that answer is probably a little frustrating for you and the listeners at home. But again, getting into how we conduct business, how we carry out investigations, and how we collect intelligence is something that I'm just not able to discuss, and I do apologize for that.
One of the things that I want to do for our community, for our public, we've heard about what's happened in Portland with people getting snatched off the streets. That's how we're hearing about it, and taken in and getting questioned, and federal authorities are behind this. And you receive your marching orders from the president. And if that's wrong, correct me on that one. And so that's what I'm trying to get to here is can you share some information with us about how you're going about this process? And at the same time, there is some discrimination between who is local and who is protesting for civil justice and those who have ulterior motives. And at the point of which folks want to know who's getting arrested and what they're getting charged with, and if they're just out here trying to say, hey, we need some form of justice because of systemic oppression, why am I getting treated the same way as a potential, foreign entity or one of these ideological bad actors?
Right.
How are you guaranteeing the safety from the FBI of our citizens?
Right. So, again, we're the FBI, right? So there are a lot of federal agencies, a lot of federal governments that fall under different departments. We do fall under the Department of Justice. You know, I wouldn't say that. You know, we try to, and what we do is we remain apolitical, right? Like when we conduct investigations, it's not, you know, political in nature. We look at investigations of people committing criminal acts in violation of federal law. And, you know, as I said before, I know, and I understand, you know, frustration with systemic oppression. I understand frustration with what's been decades of, you know, some of the issues. I mean, just like what we've seen with George Floyd, right? And if I'm, you know, seem like I'm struggling to talk, it's because, yeah, I do have these frustrations. That's why I'm struggling to talk. Again, but what we are focused on as an organization is who's violating federal law, and we don't always have a crystal ball or the ability when we're looking at someone to say, okay, this person here who's violating federal law is doing so because you know, their frustration at, you know, systemic racism, their frustration at feeling like that law enforcement treats a certain community or African Americans or people of color or poor people a certain way than other people. We don't have an ability, you know, off the bat to say, okay, that person is violating federal law for that reason, and this person is violating federal law because they have an ulterior motive. But what we do is we do open investigations and we do look at that. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's a violation of federal law, and we do the investigations and we go where the investigations take us.
Jim, I do appreciate you joining me, man. You know, you left me with more questions than you did with answers. But I appreciate you joining me on the show. And I want to give you an opportunity for final words here before we go, without me, you know, posing a question at you. Anything you want to share with our communities?
Again, you know, sorry I left you with more questions than answers, and the listeners with more questions than answers. What I would like to say is, I do think, you know, with the FBI, you know, you asked how do we ensure that, you know, the people are being protected from the FBI. And again, what this has sparked for us here in the FBI is a lot of really good conversations. When I say this, I mean, you know, the death of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor. We've had some really good conversations within the Bureau with members of our, you know, our African American, you know, employees, our personnel, our staff, sharing these experiences. And so I do believe that, you know, leadership at the highest levels of the FBI are making an effort to hear the voices of the community, to understand that this is what's been going on has been going on for some time, that it's not just something that, you know, we've been making up for decades, that this exists, that bias exists, that systemic racism exists, and we do want to be part of the solution, and we're here to protect all of our communities. As law enforcement, we're here to protect all of our communities, and I would say that, you know, what goes along with that is making certain that our law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, look like the communities that we serve, and making certain that, you know, we do a better job of inclusivity, diversity, and recruiting people of diverse backgrounds and from our community. So I will say that there is a concerted effort in the FBI to make certain that we're listening to our community and protecting our communities.
All right, my guest again, Jim Griffin, Supervisory Special Agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Seattle Department. Jim, again, thank you for coming on and joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world, our special Friday broadcast of the impacts of the coronavirus on South Seattle. And joining us in a couple minutes here will be Health Director for King County Public Health, Patty Hayes. We'll be back in a couple minutes right after this.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not driving my sweet AMC Pacer through the car wash, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. You missed a spot.